This is Radio Cairo, and this is World of Info. We're coming from Studio 3. My name is Dr. Amr MABROuk. Dua Muhammad is at the control, and today in the World of Info, it is the world of books. And as you know, my dear listeners, the rule of the game, my advice to you is whether to read this book, toss it, or skim it. And usually it is read this book because I have taken some time in reading it. I'm trying to see if whatever I read and tell you the advice. Should you read it or not? And when I go into depth about this book, then definitely my advice is to read it. And today we are talking about two very interesting books that I thought that their presentation will make a difference. And the first book is America First, Roosevelt versus Lindbergh in the Shadow of the War by H.W. Brands. And the second book is another interesting one, and it talks about physicians and their patients, and it's called This Patient, The Patient Who Changed the Life of a Physician by Alan D. Weiser. And these two books really deserve to be read. But let's start right away with the first book. And yes, the first book has got a very interesting title. It's called America First. And that reminds us, of course, with the same wordings and the sentence which has really designated the first term of President Trump from 2016 to 2020, when he called his whole period as America First. But what is really America First, and what is the story behind the name or the title? The book discusses with us the story of Roosevelt versus Lindbergh in the Shadow of War. And the writer H.W. Brands is a very famous New York Times bestseller writer. He has written a lot of books that really deserve to be read, and will try as much as possible to give you an idea of some of them. But let's talk first about this book. But before we go into details, we have to talk about the two characters behind the book. And these are Charles Lindbergh, and the other is, of course, FDR, or Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And so, who is Lindbergh? Well, Lindbergh is the man who was really the first aviator who took his plane, the Spirit of St. Louis, in 1927 to conquer the Atlantic, going from west to north to east and traversing the Atlantic Ocean in a solo flight, something that has never happened before, and he survived it, and he became a victorious man, not losing himself in the Atlantic. The courage and the braveness of Lindbergh to find his way through this solo flight and to prove to the whole world that yes, the Atlantic can be conquered by air, and therefore the rest is history, because the aviation advance has never stopped after this date in 1927. And from there onwards, the flight and the aviation started its great progress until now. We have seen the planes that cross the Atlantic in a shorter period of time, in a safer conditions, and even trans or ultrasonic for the bombers and for the fighters, and ultrasonic even for the passenger aeroplanes, as in the Concorde, the French-British innovation that stayed for maybe 20 or 25 years, crossing the Atlantic in a very short periods of time. So this was Lindbergh, but we want to discuss his story as well. Lindbergh was the grandson of a gentleman who was a Swedish man who traveled and crossed the Atlantic from Sweden to the United States of America in the 19th century. His son became an American, and he was involved in politics, and he became a senator in the Congress, in the Senate, and he was an isolationist, and he has tried as much as possible to stop President Woodrow Wilson from going to World War I, and failed, and in particular he lost his virtue with his electors, and he lost his seat in the Senate. But he remained as a very important factor in the life of his son, Charles Lindbergh. Charles Lindbergh had a smooth life as an aviator, and coming from the Midwest, from Missouri, from San Louis. The plane was called the Spirit of St. Louis, as we know, and he was a very interesting fellow. He was having a very handsome features. He was extremely tall, and at the same time, he was a silent man. He was not the type of a man who would go into talks or speeches that quite easily, which made his character very attractive for a lot of people. He started his career in aviation by working in planes that go in different routes in the United States until he made this great adventure. And coming out of this adventure, became a very important figure in the aviation industry, a symbol of courage and braveness, and at the same time, a man who had a great will and charm. He got married to a very beautiful lady, the daughter of one of the famous bankers, and from her he had a beautiful son. The first son name was Charles Lindbergh. Charles Lindbergh, the junior, the little Lindbergh, unfortunately, was kidnapped from his home as he was an infant, and it was a real tragedy. His father received various amount of letters asking for a ransom, and then it was found out that the child was kidnapped and later on lost his life, and his body was found decomposed in a near place near his home. It seems that the people who have kidnapped the child were not able to protect him, and the child died from them. It wasn't solved, the crime, until 1934, and during this period, Charles Lindbergh he and his wife were exposed to great scrutiny by the newspapermen and by the journalists who tried, like paparazzi of these days, to invade his privacy. And he was a private man, as I said to you, and really made him feel very miserable with his privacy, always intruded with a lot of pictures, wanted to take the pictures of him even before having his child as in his honeymoon and everything. So he has paid the taxation of a famous man and fame very dreadfully and very miserably all through his life. That in 1935 he decided that he has to leave the United States. He cannot live under the mercy of the journalists and the photographers, which went on continuously in 24/7. So in 1935 he decided to leave the United States, go to have some privacy in the UK, where he lived in the UK. In his period of life in the UK, which he enjoyed very much, he had the chance to travel the whole of Europe. And being an expert in aviation, he was asked as a famous man to visit different industries of aviation and aeroplanes and aeronautics, and he was asked to evaluate and give them the idea of how to build better planes. He was having the chance to travel to see the French industry, the new German industry of the Luftwaffe under Hitler, and of course the British. And of course he met Göring, and he even gave him a decoration for his gallant as a pilot who crossed solo the Atlantic. So in this period of life of Lindbergh, he was able to examine the future of aeroplane industries and to examine the new power and the prowess of the German industry of aeronautics. And he was not very happy with what he has seen in the progress of manufacture of aeroplanes in France, which he found it very backward, and of Britain, that he found that Britain is not giving enough money to the research and development of the factories of aeronautics and aeroplanes, and he felt that this is really a great recipe for disaster. However, he stayed there for quite some time, and he was feeling better to be away from the paparazzi and from the newspapersmen until 1938, with the progress of Hitler going around with his invasion of the Czech Republic, his union with the forced union with the Austrians, and his trial to invade Poland, which was very imminent. He decided in 1938, as he has seen that the war is imminent, to go back to the United States. And there he went to the United States and stayed there. So we leave him there and we go back to the second character of the book, which is FDR. FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was a man, a politician, and definitely a very well-bred man at the same time. Great intelligence, great charm, great looks, and he was a distant cousin to Theodore Roosevelt, the famous American president. And he also had we know that Theodore Roosevelt was the president for 2 periods of time, and after the death of McKinley, President McKinley, he became the president, as he was the vice president, and then another term being elected. He could have had chance to get elected again, but he refused to go into the fight for a third term. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt married his distant cousin Eleanor, who was more related, or actually like a niece to President Theodore Roosevelt. So he had the name of the Roosevelt family, which really helped to open a lot of gates for him. He, during the First World War, was the Undersecretary of the Navy, and he had his role in the World War I. Coming after the World War I, he was one of the nominees for vice president for the Democratic Party in 1920. In spite of the fact that he lost this election, he came out unscathed and therefore still maintained the chance to become a governor of New York later on. But in 1921, he had a very big problem in his life that changed his life completely. He got catched the polio virus, and he therefore was paralyzed. His lower limbs or lower legs were paralyzed from polio for the rest of his life. He has undergone a lot of physiotherapy in Palm Springs, and tried to recover as early as possible. But the sport and sportive man, unfortunately, was not able to survive this ailment. Unfortunately, he couldn't walk again. But yet he always wore some crutches to able to be standing in front of the people. This is how he won his elections as the governor of New York. In his stature and staying in this period of time, he stayed in politics, and he has gained the confidence of a lot of people, especially the empathy that he has gained from his illness, making himself surely to look like a man who has, as we say, before that he never anything bad happened to him. His story was always a story of success, but now he had to accept the occurrence of polio to him, to accept the handicap, feel the empathy towards the poor people, and always accepted the idea that bad things could happen to good people. So he won with very easy way. He won the elections of 1932 against President Hoover. How was he able to succeed and to defeat Hoover? Was due to the great economic crash that happened in 1921, 1930. And he came up with the idea of the New Deal, how to improve the economy, how to get great employment of people, how the government will have to pay and subsidize a lot of the projects, giving a chance for people to find working jobs, and therefore build at the same time roads and trains and lines for railway trains, and all this. All these projects has helped to improve the economic condition, and therefore get the United States out of the gridlock of the failure or the economic failure that happened in the early 30s. So with this great deal, or with this New Deal, he was able to gain a lot of confidence of the Americans, and therefore in 1936 he was easily elected for a second term. When looking at that period of time, the first 4 years of FDR, we find him being a member of the Woodrow Wilson, and saw how the First World War I has led to the involvement of the United States in a war outside its borders, the loss of a lot of lives of Americans, and at the same time, not the acceptance of the European partners in the war to the great role that America has done, and at the same time, the imperial powers went on, whether this was French or Britain, imperial powers, without the involvement of the United States. So the United States came out with a lot of depression from this war, and the people felt that they should have never gone to World War I. So in the first 4 years, FDR was not involved into the politics of the outside world, concentrating on the important thing of course, the economic crisis. And he also was able to, after even in his second term, to sign the neutrality law, abiding by the factor that the United States of America should not get more into a war again or battles again. And this was accepting the idea of building up a strong United States. However, at that time, he has started seeing what was happening in the world. And of course, what we can have and see was there are a lot of fiascos happening. There is the rise of fascism. We have seen what happened. He has seen what has happened in Spain. He has seen what happened in Italy with Mussolini. He has seen what's happened in the greed of Japan, in invading of China and Korea. And he has seen, of course, the great greediness of Hitler and his fascism and Nazism, and how he has swallowed Austria, took part of the Czech Republic, and at the same time knocking the doors of Polonia and taking it. And the British and the French made their own case of declaring war against Hitler in the start of the World War II in September 1939. The things went very fast, and Roosevelt thought that there will be definitely, more or less, due to the greed of the fascism and the Nazism, that by time he will find that these enemies will unite their forces, especially if they defeat the British and the French, and will invade or control, at least economically, the United States and get to reach into the Latin America and Central America. So his fears of the progress of the German new Nazi German authority and their great victories that were happening very fast, especially when they swarmed Belgium, Holland, and Norway, and took up France, and even were able to defeat France and get into Paris. All this has rung the wrong bells in the mind and the conscience of FDR. FDR started a strong bonding, and which of course was made by advancing of Churchill with a lot of letters of in between both leaders about the condition and how Churchill is demanding the United States of America to come to save Britain from being annexed again to the Nazis' power, and therefore America will find itself in the middle and will have to submit sooner or later to the forces of evil. However, as Roosevelt has changed his mind gradually about whether he should get involved in the war or not, he started giving some concessions. He's convinced the Congress of sending, which is very important, sending and elevation of the embargo of selling arms to the Allies, which he started right as well. And then Churchill was able to convince him, especially after the defeat of France, to give him Navy ships in return for giving the bases, the famous British bases all over the world, to Roosevelt, which he found that this was a good deal economically about how the American Navy will start to control all the different bases which belonged to the British, and in return for sending them some older destroyers and ships and boats and submarines. So at that time, a lot of Americans were facing the isolationist idea, and think that America should stay isolated, maintain its neutrality, and get rid of this European war and not getting involved and not repeating the mistake of First World War One. And of course, one of the big voices at that time was the voice of Lindenberg. Lindenberg was against the involvement of America in the wars. He has seen the factories of armaments of the aviation in the Britain and in France and in Germany, and he knew how it's important to have a strong air force, and he was a protege of building a strong aviation industry in the United States, but he was against sending these forces or sending these armaments or involvement of the American army in the war abroad. He has joined America First. It's a committee which was made by a lot of people who were with the Isolation Pact, and started his own speeches, which has taken against the Roosevelt, especially as Roosevelt by time as a politician became more convinced that sooner or later the United States will be pulled in this war, and therefore the United States has to get to this war under its own terms, not the terms of endearment forced by the Nazis or by the Japanese. So Lindenberg, with his fame, with his character, started to be an antagonizing force to Roosevelt. This went on until Lindenberg started making some mistakes, and it appeared in front of the audience and of the whole Americans that he was referring to become having more or less ideas like the Nazis are saying, which is an accusation that was proved by the FBI examination to Lindenberg, that he was a nationalist Democrat and not into the favor of the Nazi media and not working with the Nazis. But of course, apparently, this looked like as if he was involved into the fifth column. The fifth column, by the way, is a sentence or a statement or a name that was given by a fascist general when he was invading Madrid in the Civil War. He was dancing towards Madrid with four columns of his army, and he's saying, "We're not just four columns. There is the fifth column, which are the sympathetic people inside Madrid who will join us in the proper time." So Roosevelt started talking that there is a lot of people who are involved in the fifth column. He never mentioned the name of Lindenberg in particular. First of all, he didn't want to give more fame to Lindenberg, and the second important thing was he, as a president, should not go low to talk to a citizen. But he advised Lindenberg to quit his job as a colonel in the Reserve Air Force, which he was forced to do. And of course, we can know what happened in December 1941 with the Japanese invading or bombing Pearl Harbor. Of course, at that time, the United States was in a state of self-defense and was involved in the war. And within few days, Hitler was stupid enough to announce and declare war against the United States. And of course, at that time, Charles Lindenberg decided that he is going to try to offer his service as an officer in the Air Force. And Roosevelt didn't like this idea and didn't accept that one of his nemesis will become a war hero. So he refused his voluntary acceptance of the war. So Lindenberg joined one of the aviation industries and became a consultant for building aeroplanes, which was a very important role and a job he did. He met General MacArthur, and General MacArthur was a great fan of Lindenberg, took him as a sort of a counselor in examining the planes that were reaching the authority of MacArthur in the Pacific War Theater, and he was involved in a lot of almost 50 sorties that were made among planes when he was testing the planes, and these were 50 sorties that were made by the American Air Force under the leadership of MacArthur in the Pacific, and he was involved in one of the kills against one of the Japanese fighters. After the war and after the death of Roosevelt, there was some rehabilitation that was made to Lindenberg. Eisenhower, as the President of the United States in 1952, decided to give him an honorary Brigadier General in the Reserve Air Force in return for all the services he presented to the Air Force prior to the World War II and during World War II. He has written his memoirs about the spirit of St. Louis in 1953 and received a Pulitzer Prize. And later on, he lived a normal, routine life until he died in 1974. But definitely, what we can see from all this story is that what happened in the 30s and the conflict between Roosevelt and Lindenberg was a sort of who was always right. And always Roosevelt was saying that we are politicians, Lindenberg is not a politician. So, as they say, the pathway to hell is always filled with a lot of good intentions. Lindenberg, when he wanted the United States not to get involved in World War II, these were good intentions. And this was even the intentions that were declared by Roosevelt in his last bidding for power in 1941. When he went for re-elections for the third time, he said, I will try to make the United States not involved in the war. He knows that this was going to be a failure, but Lindenberg was living in the 19th century. He believed that America should not be involved in the war. But America was the superpower of the 20th century. And it has been always the fact in politics that superpowers will sooner or later find a way to control the world or to pass through it. An interesting book by H.W. Brands, America First, the book that has been published in 2024, a book that deserves to be read. So stay tuned to us after the break.
Inside and outside, we got it all going on. Inside and outside, yeah. Inside and outside, we got it all going on. Inside and outside, yeah.
And we've got it all. Cairo Radio 95.4.
And my name is Dr. Amr MABROUK. Dua Muhammad is still at the control, and we're coming from Studio 3 in Radio Cairo. And our second part of the book. The book of today is a very interesting book. The book is called This Patient, the patient who changed the lives of their physicians. It's by Alan D. Weiser. And this is a Dutch book. And in Holland, there was a story that was written by one of the journalists about the lives and the times of his brother-in-law, who was a famous Dutch cyclist, who he won a lot of races, and suddenly he discovered that he was having a terminal illness, and he was sent to an important and a very famous physician for the treatment of diseases of cancer. And he received proper care and proper treatment. And he has definitely affected the life of this physician, that he came even in his funeral later after his death and attended his obituary. And the journalist came to an idea. He said, if this person or if this physician, his life has changed because he had an encounter with a very special patient, then most probably a lot of physicians have patients in their lives who have these patients have touched their lives, changed the way or their perspective of living and their perspective of facing their patients. And definitely these will, it was very important to write these articles. It's going to be illuminating to the whole public. And so he approached a lot of physicians in Netherlands and telling them, why don't you write to me about your experience? And who were the patients who changed their lives. And so he went, and it became a great success. Instead of writing 2 or 5 columns, he found himself even going beyond the borders of Netherlands, asking people from physicians from the States or from the UK or from the whole of Europe to write their experience. Every one of them would write an article about who is the patient who has changed his life. And so there is this book which is full of articles that were published in this newspaper telling us about the different experiences that these physicians. So we can find the physicians who have written in this book, in these articles, different types of physicians. There were the general practitioners, there were the ophthalmologists, there were the oncologists, there were the surgeons, even the forensic medicine doctors. And as they go, and everybody of them would write a small article, maybe 500 or 750 pages, that makes the book very easily to read and very easily to digest, and it's always a good food for thought. Maybe because I'm a physician, definitely this book has touched my heart more than maybe regular readers, but definitely patients change their lives. I have a motto in my life and say, every patient that you see will take part of you with him or with her, and every patient you will treat will definitely affect your life. And yes, a lot of patients have affected my life. A lot of times I've seen how the patients have changed my life. And as we go through these beautiful chapters of the book, we'll talk about, for example, a forensic physician, doctor that belongs to the forensic medicine, was asked to come and examine a gentleman who unfortunately passed away in a motorbike accident. And there she went there and to see the patient or the corpse of the dead body. And as she watched the man and signed the certificate and examined him and to diagnose the cause of death and all this, suddenly it was the early dawn and sun started to appear, and there was a beautiful, peaceful look of the beautiful nature in the Netherlands. And as the sun was rising and the wheat fields were reflecting, the yellow wheat fields were reflecting the color of the sun, and it looked very peaceful. And there was a deceased man on the ground. This really affected the excuse me, the listener, the physician, as she said, life goes on. Even there was a dead man, and there is life still born, as we can see, and how we can always find ourselves. So this is really very interesting. Another physician is writing about his encounter with an old man who has told him a lot of good stories, and how he started his life as a nurse, the writer. And he was talking to this old man who turned out to be a physician, a retired physician in an old home, a nursing home. And when he told him that I am, as a nurse, will try my best to become a physician, although it is very tough to study medicine after working as a nurse, he even brought his daughter and he encouraged him, and he said to him, you have to chase your dream, you have to go after your dream, and you'll definitely fulfill your hope. And of course, this has really affected him, that he decided to go on and continue with his study of medicine and became a physician in the end. The other story which goes is to the advice that one of the physicians is giving to his colleagues and to us is never to lose hope. When he had a car accident of a child who was completely looked as if he was brain dead, and everybody was saying, all right, there is no hope, we have to stop taking care of him, and there is no chance of this child will survive. And suddenly they decided not to give in, and they went on taking care of the child, who was doing all the factors, and suddenly the child woke up, and he looked that he was fine. So never give hope was one of the ideas by the physicians. Another, he has seen a lady who was living in a nursing home, suffering from dementia, and nobody visited her, and nobody took care of her visits. And so he was, as a physician in charge of this nursing home, he would go there every day, even trying to give some hope to this lady who's gradually losing her mind and her appearance. But sometimes she remembers something, or she tells something, or she says something. Then he got very much involved in the kindness of this lady, who had bouts of kindness and then bouts of dementia until she passed away. And then he went to her funeral to find that the church was full with her friends and her family and even distant people who knew her when she was working as a very important lady. And he said, where were all these people when she was left alone in this nursing home and nobody is visiting her? Then he knew the answer of this question is that people with dementia, as they don't know who they are anymore, their friends and their family would not come and visit them, and therefore in the end they lose any connection with their living ones or their loving ones. And then these loving ones suddenly will appear in the funeral as if they are paying the debt of feeling that they are really a feeling of guilt that they have and that they should go for it. Another physician is writing about her experience with a patient who had a cancer in her uterus, and at the same time she was pregnant. And the idea was she has to terminate this pregnancy, lose her uterus, and go to treat the cancer. The lady refused, and they told her that this can affect her life, and her child can be born as an orphan if he even survives the oral treatment of the cancer. She insisted that she will continue with the pregnancy, and for the unexpected physician, the lady survived, the child survived, and she maintained her life afterwards. And this has really cleared the path for the management of cancer uterus, that patients can continue their pregnancy and go on with it without affecting their life or their life being doomed. Another experience of one of the experience of the plastic surgeons who had to deal with patients with anomalies in their face, and how these surgeries go on regularly for many times and affect the personality of the children, and they're facing that they are unfortunately severely traumatized by their appearance, and yet the children started, this child was having a very strong character. She maintained her integrity, went on continuously with a big fight of her status, kept her clarity of her mind, and survived and lived a very good life depending on the will. So the lesson that he learned from this patient is that if there is a will, there is a way. If people are strong, they can fight the deformities and can live a really productive life. So how is it the quality of life or the quantity of life? It depends on a great chance on the patients themselves and their will to survive. Another physician was doing surgery for obesity, and how his surgery has improved the appearance of the patient after losing 60 kilograms of her weight, turned out to be a very attractive lady, and therefore all the bullying that she was exposed to during her early life in childhood, when she was bullied for being obese, she found herself having a beautiful physical appearance, and people started to be interested in her. So he decided to go on and continue with his pursuit of combating obesity by surgery, and giving thousands of surgeries that was done all through his life and a career as an obesity surgeon. Definitely this change of the physical appearance of the patient is very important. The most important thing that an advice was given by one of the physicians who has written the articles is about the child abuse, how sometimes injuries that happen to children should attract the attention of the physician. Always remember that if a child comes with an injury, or with a fear in his eyes, even if he is denying that his parents or the caregivers have done him this ailment, you should always maintain that there could be a child abuse, and this could be really saving of the life if the doctor is very skeptical of what's happening. The idea of gaining the confidence of patients and trust is very important, and always try as much as possible to choose how to bring bad news to patients, and at the same time giving them hope, because this is very important. Sometimes we can always say, should we treat this patient or not to treat him? And this is wrong. We are not having prejudice or decisions to say that I should stop the treatment of this patient, or should I go on treating him and giving him another chance. It's not the role of the physician to do euthanasia. Although the writers or some of the physicians who has written in this book are talking about euthanasia as a source of treatment, this is not the job of physicians. This is something that I bet to differ about, and I think that this is not the right way to deal with it, because this is not the judge role. A physician is living to help patients, not to help them to get rid of their lives. So one of the writers of the book has described how a lady has given a birth to a child with Down syndrome, and she and her husband decided to abandon the child. And this was a big problem in the hospital. They thought that this is very strange to happen. How come that a lady like that would deny the service to her child and claim that he shouldn't live, or they should give him for adoption? Then the physician who has written the story went on trying to approach the lady and approach the husband, and in very few moments or few days, the mother started to fall in love with the child, and so did the father, and things have changed. Therefore, you should give time to the patients. You should give them hope, and you should give them a lot of choices that this will make them trust you and trust their physician, that they are going to find an important prospect. Some was very important, which is that a motto that should be always said: we should identify with the patient, not with his illness. We should understand the patient. We should try to comprehend what's going on and ask him always to find out the way to make sure that as we go through with different lives of people, that we should always explain and find the time to talk with our patients. Sometimes I always say that you should meet the patient 3 times before any surgery, in order not just to gain his confidence, but to meet on common grounds, to share the feelings of hope and fear with the patient. Because if you don't share these feelings, then you suddenly will find that there will be distance between you and the patient, and this should not be happening. At the same time, this distance should always remain in the professional point of view. You shouldn't very much personalize the relation between you and the patient. At the same time, you shouldn't make it very much official, because the empathy and the sympathy are needed in treatment of patients. The well-being of the patients depend a lot on how the patients are perceiving their type of imagination and understanding to their illness. The more that the physician is giving time and effort to tell in a lot of empathy and sympathy what's going on and what are the plans, and even sometimes putting a lot of colorful things around it, not untrue expectations, but even the percentages should be mentioned, and everything should be laid on the table, but at the same time always has to be given credit to the will of the patient, to the well-being of the patients, and how they should really have to build the trust to them. The idea of building trust, the idea of dealing with patients as human beings, not as ill people, is really definitely very important. The book tends to tell us about the story, tell us about how we should deal with patients, how physicians, their lives have changed, and how some even a very interesting story that was written by a physician who stopped the practice of medicine in spite of succeeding in treatment of a patient. He has given us the experiment of what happened to him, the experience. He said that he was a GP in training. He received a note and he was completely exhausted. And he received a note from one of the patients that he is entitled to go and visit at home, that he's suffering from pain in his stomach. So he told the daughter of this patient, well, this can wait until tomorrow. And so he went there at 9 o'clock instead of going at 12 because she woke him up. So at 9 o'clock in the morning, he went to the home, examined the old man, found nothing of interest. And then suddenly the guy told him, there is some pain here in the abdomen. And he looked in his abdomen and he found out that there was an impending rupture of a major artery in the abdomen. It's called aneurysm. And so he called the ambulance, sent the man to the operating room, and he received a lot of gratitude from the family of the person and from the hospital, saying that he did the right thing, because if there was any delayment, then definitely the patient would have died from the explosion of this aneurysm. He blamed himself for the fact that he was tired. He didn't go on the spot, and at the same time, he only diagnosed the patient when the patient insisted that he was suffering from more pain. And as he was leaving the home, and he said to him, the patient pointed to his abdomen, so he felt that he is obliged to examine him. This has changed his decision from going to follow a medical prospect, going more into pharmaceuticals and not becoming a physician anymore. Of course, this is very pragmatic. This is over dogmatic. But the idea of exhausting physicians until they are very, very tired and claim that they need to have some sleep is very important. I remember that in my early days of practice as a junior resident, I found myself that sometimes we lack the sleep. And if you lack the sleep for 24 hours or for 36 hours, most probably your decisions could not be right. And therefore, nowadays, all over the world, the time that is given for physicians to have complete shutdown or complete relaxation after an on-duty day is very important. People will have to go to rest after having in duty for 12 hours or 16 hours. They have to rest for a full day on the next day so that they can function, and therefore they will not do any mistakes. This idea is really very important. The idea and the fact that the more you give instructions and the more you understand a lot of this, the more this affects. So these stories definitely affect the career of physicians. And the book is an interesting book. The patient who changed the lives of the physician. A book by Alan Deviser, and definitely a book.
You're locked in to the number one radio station. Number one.
Number one.
Number one, baby.
Number one.
Is the bomb.
Number one. Keep listening, and we'll remain number one.
With this, we come to the end of the episode of today of World of Info. Today was the world of books, and we have presented two books that really deserves to be read. America First by H.W. Brands, talking about Roosevelt versus Lindbergh in the Shadow of War, an interesting book that really deserves to be read, especially in nowadays time. And the second book is another book that is related to medicine, and this is talking about this patient, the patient who changed the lives of their physicians, by Alan Deviser, an interesting Dutch book that talks about physicians and how patients sometimes change your life and even your life career. This was the World of Info, the World of Books, and we hope that you will enjoy your weekend, and hopefully we'll see you same time, same station in Radio Cairo. Stay tuned always to Radio Cairo. My name is Dr. Amr MABROUK. Muhammad was at the control. See you.